wrong for tricking my in-laws into trying my food? This isn't necessarily my proudest moment, but I'm tired of being the outcast. My 32 female husband, Pete, 34 male, comes from a family where the women are all bakers. I am a baker myself, and I used to sell out of my house, but I stopped because I like it just being a hobby. His sister-in-law, Kay, 39, is the one who is known for her cupcakes and cake pops. When I first met everyone years ago, it was the first thing I learned. Even when Pete mentioned how good my stuff was, everyone would say that Kay sells hers and they're popular, so they must be better. Whenever I bring treats, they are often left untouched because they are not Kay's. Yes, I've been told that. They'd ask me to... Bismillah! Bless you! Yarhamakallah. They asked me to bring something every get-together and they never touch it. To be clear, Kay is mainly a baker, whereas I bake and specialize in professionally decorated cakes. Kay says that overly decorated cakes are compensating for their bad taste, and Pete's family agrees. We had a barbecue Monday for Memorial Day and everyone made their treats. Kay decided to bring cake pops. She posted them on her Instagram the night before. So, and I know this is immature, I made the same exact ones she did, same flavor and design. We got there and everyone asked where my treats were. I said they're in the car and I'll get them in a minute. So I waited for everyone to be outside, then I brought mine in and put them next to Kay's. After we ate, I noticed the family eating my cake pops and not Kay's. She didn't notice at first and then asked if they weren't feeling cake pops. They said they just ate them and they were the best she ever made and asked what she did different. Mother-in-law even said they looked so much better in person than in the picture. You're cute! Okay, distraction. Kay was confused and said hers were still on the table. That's when I said, oh, I brought those. Glad you enjoyed them. Her husband said he hadn't had one yet. Lies. He ate two. And everyone else just said, yeah, they were okay. Kay didn't say anything the rest of the night. Pete thought it was funny, but didn't know what I did until the reveal. But his brother, Kay's husband, said yesterday that what I did was mean and I'm just mad that Kay is the better baker. But Pete said it's ridiculous. The family, including Kay, puts down my baking when they won't even try it, all because I'm not Kay. So, am I the asshole? Is she?
Is she the bad asshole? Is she a bad girl? Is she bad for doing that to the baby? Oh, this is my baby. This is my baby. Hi!
This is your first AMA. This is your first asshole video. I mean, too bad. I can't say that out loud. Sorry. This is your first AIT. Oh my god, I'm running out of space.
Storytime. I became a stepmom at 22 and my stepkids hate me. So a little background information. I was 22 and working at Hooters, and I had this one regular who literally came in every single day that I worked. I mean, it wasn't really creepy because I did give him my schedule because he tipped really well, but that's besides the point. The one night he asked me out, and obviously I knew that he was going to pay for our dinner, so I said yes, because I was hungry and I did not want to pay for food. So anyways, I go on this date and I actually end up really liking him, just to find out that he is 40 years old. Fast forward a few months, we start dating, and he realizes that I still live at home with my mom and dad. So he's like, oh, like, you can move in with me, but first you need to meet my kids. And I, thought that his kids were going to be, 2 and 3 years old. No, when I went over to dinner the one night at their house, there were 4 kids who were literally all above the age 13. And every single one of the girls gave me a death stare as I sat down in my chair, for part 2. Part 2 about how I became a stepmom at 22 and my stepkids hate me. So like I said, we're all sitting down in the dining room and there's 4 kids. There's 1 boy, 3 girls. The one boy is 14 and all the other girls are 15, 16, and 19. And we're going to call my boyfriend James. James is like, okay, well, I'm going to go back to the kitchen and finish cooking. You guys should bond a little bit. So he leaves me alone with these little fucking roaches and they just start firing shots at me. They're like, you're a gold digger, aren't you? Don't worry, my dad will never marry you, so you're not going to get any of his money. So after that, I told James that they need to warm up to me a little bit more before I move in. So for the next month, we would try to plan things with the kids. But anytime that I was going to be there, every single one of them would be like, we're not going, we hate her. Eventually, James just kind of said, fuck it, and he asked me to marry him. So I moved in, and then a week later, we got married. His kids didn't show up to the wedding, and James had to go on a work trip. So I was moving some of my stuff into the house from the car, and the kids fucking locked me out of the house. This has all been within the span of 5 months. What should I do? Storytime about the time that I was kidnapped. I would just like to add in an extreme trigger warning. So a little background information. I was 16 at the time, and my 2 friends invited me to a birthday party. It was this girl and her boyfriend. They said that it was in the south side and not a lot of people were going to be there. So we go to the guy's house who's throwing the party and nobody's there except for him. And at first he was being really nice. I asked where everybody was and they were like, oh, they're going to show up later. While my friends are sitting on the couch, they start making out for an hour straight. And this guy, who we're going to call Jeremy, he keeps going in and out of the front door. Well, my friends asked the guy if they could go to the bathroom and he goes, yeah, it's just around back. And at this point, they are gone for an hour. So now I'm super freaked out and I'm thinking of all the ways that I could possibly get out of this house. So I ask if I can use the bathroom. So he leads me to the backyard, which is through this alleyway, and it's pretty much fenced in by brick buildings. So when we're back there, I'm like, where's the bathroom? And he points down to a bucket, like for part two. Part two about the time that I was kidnapped. So like I said, he leads me to the backyard. When I ask where the bathroom is, he points at a bucket sitting in the middle of the yard. So I'm about to do my business and he's literally staring at me. And I'm like, can you not watch me? And he turns around. But he's still literally standing there. So at this point, I had a plan that whenever we got out of that alley, I was just going to start running. Well, that didn't go according to plan. Because as soon as we got out of that alleyway, he grabs me by my hair and drags me into the house. So right now, I'm super scared. I'm thinking, where the hell are my friends at? Well, then he says, we're going to play a game. So at this point, I'm just going along with everything because I want to make it out of this alive. So he puts a screwdriver in this lock in the front door. And then he makes me turn around and count to 15 and then turn back around. When I turned back around, he was standing there naked with a pair of leather gloves on. And at this point, I'm thinking that my friend set me up. Anyways, he punches me in the face, knocking me out cold. I woke up later to him choking me while I'm laying on the floor, like for part 3. Part 3 about the time that I was kidnapped. So like I said, he had punched me in the face, knocking me out cold. And when I woke up, he was choking me while I was laying on the floor. And he says, you're going to do whatever I say or I'm going to kill you. And just to prove it to you, he starts choking me in this weird way where I literally am coming in and out of consciousness. Apparently, if you choke somebody a certain way, they can literally pass out. So I said, I'll do whatever he said. And that's whenever he forced me to take off all my clothes. For the next 5 days, I had been sexually assaulted repeatedly and had no food or water. One minute he would be completely fine and then the next he would act like a psycho. He would be like, nobody loves me, I'm the spawn of Satan, I'm Satan's child. Just a lot of off-the-wall shit. So I started using reverse psychology on him. He said my own mother doesn't love me, and I was like, well, I love you. Fast forward, the 5th day was the worst day. He was constantly beating me. He had thrown me on the floor. I was begging for food. I still had no clothes on. You will never guess what he did next, like for part 4. Part 4 about the time that I had been kidnapped. So like I said, 5th day the worst. I'm begging for food. He's beating me constantly. So he made me sit on the couch next to him and he opens a can of cat food. I was so hungry at this point, it did not matter what it was. Well, he went into one of his episodes and he threw a space heater at my head. I woke up and I was laying on my back on the ground and I could barely open my eyes. They were like swollen shut. I could see a little bit and when I looked down, I saw that both of my hands had been broken completely. Like every single bone. Well, my parents, who had been on drugs at the time, never bothered to look for me for those few days. Well, that morning, apparently, my mom had this weird gut feeling that they needed to find me. So she told my dad, we need to find Christina. So they had been out looking for me and they saw this guy that was one of my friends. And he pretty much says, you better tell me where Christina is or I'm calling the cops on all of you. So they had told my dad that the house right next door was where I was at. So he went and knocked on the neighbor's door. And they said, well, we've been hearing screaming next door all week, like for part 5. Part 5 about the time that I was kidnapped. So like I said, my dad knocked on the door of the house that was right next to the one that I was in. They were like, oh, well, we've been hearing screaming next door all week. My dad's like, why the hell wouldn't you call the cops? And they were like, oh, because he throws a lot of parties. So while I'm laying on the floor, I hear my dad at the door. And the door's open just a crack. So that way my dad wouldn't see me, of course. Well, through the crack, my dad saw my legs laying on the floor. So my mom and dad forced their way into the house. Mind you, I'm still laying on the floor naked. And the guy who kidnapped me literally pulled out this big-ass knife. My dad grabbed this dog chain that was on the floor, wrapped it around this guy's neck, and it's like trying to choke him. Fast forward, the police pull my dad off. And as I'm in the ambulance, the cops had said that they had found another girl in the house. She was upstairs chained to the wall. And he was sexually assaulting her and she was pregnant. But the child inside of her was dead, and if they would have found her a week later, she probably would have been dead. Because this happened back then, they weren't able to put him in jail for a long time. Like if you guys want a part 6. Part 6 about the guy who had kidnapped me. So it turns out that he had sexually assaulted multiple women. But like I said, because it was a long time ago, they weren't really able to put him in jail as long as they wanted to. So they pretty much based the case around the baby who had died in this situation. Well, during this time, he ended up getting out on bail. And he tried committing suicide. He shot himself in the stomach, but he still lived. And after that, he ended up doing a little more than 20 years. A lot of the women that he had assaulted still didn't get their justice. And I had tried looking for the girl who was there in the house, but nobody could find her. Well, I want to say in 2006, I was in a thrift store with my husband. And as I was going in, I saw him walking out. And I literally was so scared. Like, just looking at him literally, like, paralyzed me. And he looked back at me like he knew exactly who I was. So I told my husband that we had to hurry up and get out of there. And after that, I never saw him again. Extremely creepy story time on how my aunt passed away. So a little background information. About 5 years ago, my aunt had gotten pregnant. It was really weird because a few months before she got pregnant, the doctor told her that she would never be able to have kids. And her husband had been trying for years. Well, I think like 2 weeks after the baby was born, it had passed away. And I don't really know why. For some reason, my mom won't tell me. which is weird. But anyways, after that, my aunt just felt like a lot of things weren't going the way that she wanted them to in her life. So she decided to get closer with God. Well, every Sunday night, we go to my grandparents' house for a family dinner. And while we were there, my aunt starts going on this whole rampage. She said that God's not giving her the answers that she needs, and I don't really know what she means by answers. So my grandparents kick her out because she's acting like a psycho. Well, the same night at 3 a.m. in the morning, we hear a knocking on the door. And lo and behold, it's my aunt. So my mom lets her in because she feels bad and feels like she's the only one that will actually listen to my aunt. So she makes everybody sit at the kitchen table, and she pulls out a Ouija board from her bag, like for part 2. Creepy story time about how my aunt passed away, part 2. So like I said, she makes us all sit down at the kitchen table, and she pulls out a Ouija board. She was like, I found out how I can get some answers. I just feel like I need you guys around me for positive energy. And my family is very, very religious. Like, we don't with that. But because my mom felt bad for her, she let her use it in our house. But my mom didn't want my sisters and I around that, so she just sent us to bed. Well, the next morning, I wake up and I ask my mom what happened with the Ouija board situation. My mom just said that it was really scary, because before she thought it was like a load of bullshit. And she said that her and my dad didn't touch the Ouija board because, like I said, they were very religious and did not mess with that stuff. But apparently, it said for her not to buy a house with the numbers 2815. Well, 2 years later, my aunt got remarried, and her husband ended up having 2 kids. So they bought a new house, and no, it didn't have the numbers on it. One of their kids accidentally shattered the glass door, so they went and got a new one, and it came with those exact numbers on it. 2 days later, the house burned down and nobody survived. Storytime about the 2-year-old boy who lost his life at the Pittsburgh Zoo. On a Sunday morning, a mother decided that she was going to take her son to the zoo. Everything was going good until they had gotten to the wild African dog exhibit. I'm going to insert a picture of what it looks like right here. On both sides of the exhibit, there was plexiglass. But looking straight out into the exhibit, there was no glass. They also had a roughly 4.5-foot railing there. Well, as most parents do whenever they take their children to the zoo, they pick them up so that way they can get a better look at the animals. Well, this mom had an idea of standing her child up onto the railing, get a better look at the dogs. Now, me personally, I have been to that zoo before. There are many signs saying not to lean over or set your child onto the railing. Well, in an instant, her child had lunged forward, and she had accidentally let go of him. At 11:45, her child had dropped 10 feet down into the dog enclosure. A few seconds later, the people around her had went to get employees. But by that time, the dogs had already gotten to the 2-year-old boy. Like for part 2. Part 2 about the 2-year-old boy who lost his life at the Pittsburgh Zoo. So like I said, she had dropped her child into the exhibit, and by that time the dogs already got to him. As soon as this happened, visitors went and told the employees. Shortly after, zookeepers were able to call off several of the dogs, and they had immediately went back into the building. 3 more were eventually drawn from the child, but the last dog was very aggressive and the police had to shoot the animal. The father soon arrived at the scene, and after the mother and father were taken to the hospital for immediate trauma therapy. Since the exhibit opened in 2006, USDA had conducted over 35 inspections on that exhibit, and none of those times did they decide that it was unsafe. And this situation happened in 2012. Parents decided to sue the zoo in May of 2013. In court, the mother had argued that the zoo had failed miserably to prevent the attack. And this is what the zoo said. This was caused because of the mother's negligence and carelessness. I'm going to tell you guys my opinion real quick. I think it's the mother's fault. What do you guys think? Storytime about why I made my boyfriend stop being friends with his girl best friend. So a little background information. I was in my sophomore year of high school, and my boyfriend and I had been dating for about 6 months. And he had been best friends with this girl, we're gonna call her Addie, for about 3 years. Now, I had known Addie way before that, probably since we were in kindergarten. But her and I weren't like BFFs, we were more of acquaintances. But obviously, we became friends because she was always around my boyfriend. A month after him and I started dating, I decided that we had to set boundaries for their friendship. Because they had first period together, right? Well, every morning at 9:45, I would go on Snapchat and I would see a picture of them. And it would be her kissing him on the cheek. Not only would it be on her story, but it would also be on his. And I had her on Snapchat before that. She had never done that, ever. So he said that he had talked to Addie about it, right? And things were good for the next 2 months. Then they were forced to work together on a project. Like for part 2. Part 2 about why I made my boyfriend stop being friends with his girl best friend. So like I said, they had been forced to work together on a school project. At least that's what he told me. So I brushed it off because I was not about to seem like the jealous girlfriend. Well, the next day, him and I were supposed to go out to the movies. So I texted him right before we were about to leave, and I said, "Hey, are you on your way to get me?" He goes, "OMG, no, I'm sorry, I forgot. I have to work with Addie on this project. She's about to come over my house." So at this point, I'm like really pissed off. So I text him and I say, "I thought you guys had a whole week to work on this project. Why does it have to be tonight?" Addie knew that him and I were supposed to go to the movies that night also. He said, we just want to get it done really quickly so that way I can spend the rest of the week with you. And she's snapping me the whole time that she's at his house off of his phone. So at around 1:30 a.m., I get a Snapchat from her on his account, and she's laying on his chest. Like for part 3. Part 3 about why I made my boyfriend stop being friends with his girl best friend. So like I said, she snaps me at 1:30 in the morning, a picture of her laying on his chest, and it's captioned, "Hey girlie, I hope you don't mind, but I have to spend the night at his house. He lost track of time working on our project, and it's way too late for him to take me home." So at this point, I'm furious, and I don't snap her back. So the next morning, I call my boyfriend, and I asked him, "Hey, is Addie still there?" So he says yeah, and then I ask him to put me on speakerphone. So when he does, I say hi to Addie. She goes, "OMG, hey girl, how are you?" And that's when I pretty much go off on this. I tell him that while he was asleep, she was sending me pictures of her laying on top of him off of his Snapchat, and that she was sending those type of pictures to multiple people on his Snapchat because my best friend had texted me that morning saying that she thought that we broke up because Addie was sending her pictures of her laying on top of him. So I tell him, pick me or her. And she starts crying. After a minute of silence, he hangs up the phone and then blocks me. Good luck to the next girl. Story time about how I walked in on my fiance and another man. So a little background information. My fiance and I have been together for 4 years, and we started dating our junior year of high school. Well, we all went to Florida after we finally got engaged, and he invited his best friend and I invited my best friend. And I always got vibes that he was like really touchy with his best friend and just like other guys. But I was definitely not one of those people who was about to tell my boyfriend how to act. During Truth or Dare or something, someone would dare him to kiss like a guy and he would just do it. And I didn't really get any off vibes from that because I just did not think that way. So like I said, we all invited our friends to Florida. Well, I think like the third night that we got there, we all decided to go to the club. And we were having a super good time. Like everybody was just doing their own thing. I was with my girls, we were hanging out, taking shots. My boyfriend and his best friend, they were doing body shots off of each other. But my boyfriend said that he had drank too much, so his best friend took him back to the hotel room. Y'all will not believe what happened next. Like for part 2. Part 2 about how I found my boyfriend and his best friend hooking up. So like I said, my boyfriend's best friend took him back to the hotel room. And I really wanted to spend time with him because we were only supposed to be there for like 3 days. So I decided I would go back to the hotel room early to go see him and make sure that he was okay. Well, I get to the hotel room and all the lights are off. It's very quiet and I think that everybody's sleeping. So I take my shoes off and I go to our room and nobody's in there. So I go to his best friend's room, and when I open the door, I see him and his best friend laying on the bed naked, making out. I literally stood there in shock for like 2 minutes, and they just like did not hear me, did not look over, did not see me or anything. Eventually, I literally was like, what the f? And they both look over, and my boyfriend is literally, it's like he saw a ghost. So I leave the room, he gets dressed, he comes over to me, and he starts talking to me. Like for part 3. Part 3 about me finding my boyfriend and his best friend hooking up. So like I said, after I catch my boyfriend and his best friend naked together in bed making out, he takes me into the living room to have a talk. And I thought he was just gonna say, oh, I'm drunk, it didn't mean anything. Nope, complete 360, total opposite, not at all what I thought. He was like, listen, like, you know, I've been meaning to tell you this for a while. I just didn't know how to tell you. My parents are super religious. If I ever told them that I was gay, they would never accept me. They would cut me off, everything. And his parents were super fucking rich. So I kind of understood, but I was pissed the fuck off. Like, you wasted so much time in my life just to fucking tell me you were gay. So he was like, we can still have the wedding and everything like that. You know, I understand if you don't want to be with me. So we kind of made a deal that, you know, if I stay with him, I can pretty much have access to all his family's money. I can buy the house that we were going to buy. So currently, while he is hooking up with other men, I have a boyfriend, but we just act like we're together. Story time. My dad got my half-brother's girlfriend pregnant. A little background information. This all happened a few years ago. Anyways, my brother was fresh out of high school and he had been dating this girl named Serena for 2 years. And my dad, for some reason, hated her. At least that's what we thought. Well, my brother didn't have a license at the time, so every time that she came over, she needed somebody to drop her off at home. So my dad would always offer to drop her off at home, even though he literally hated her. And he could have just ordered her an Uber, which is what he did with all of my friends. Well, the one night her parents called and they were like, hey, like, is Serena still there? She hasn't came home yet. And my dad said that he was dropping her off. So I called my dad and he said that they ran out of gas on the side of the road. So that was just like one incident. Well, the next morning my mom goes to get in the car for work and she finds a thong in the car. So she brings it in the house and she asks me, hey, is this yours? Meanwhile, I had never seen them before. So then she goes and asks my half-brother and my dad's whose they are, like for part 2. Part 2 about how my dad got my half-brother's girlfriend pregnant. So like I said, my mom found that thong in the car. She came and asked me if it was mine. I said no. So then she asked my dad and my brother whose they were. So she asked my dad first. He said, I don't know whose they are. He said they probably just fell out of Serena's bag. And then she asked my brother. And my brother said, oh, those are Serena's. So after that, my brother came in my room. And he was like, do you think it's weird that the same underwear that Serena was wearing before she left ended up in the car? So I guess she had the underwear on literally before she left the house. Dumb alert. Anyway, so a few weeks later, Serena breaks up with my brother. Well, around the same time, my dad started staying after work really late, like every day of the week. Well, long story short, my mom went through his phone because she felt like something was going on, and she reads a conversation between my dad and Serena. Like, oh, I'm so sad that you couldn't come to the ultrasound. So then my mom and him divorced, and he's currently raising his child with Serena. Storytime about how I was sexually harassed twice while working at Walmart. So a little background information. This all happened last year. So originally I was working in a warehouse, but whenever COVID hit, lost my job, I had to get a new job. So I applied at Walmart in the electronics section because they paid more money, period. And on my second day, I finally went and started working in electronics. So they had asked some of the employees to show me around. So while this one employee was showing me around, he took me to the back where the photos were. Well, whenever I got back there, this employee named Terry said, oh, she's mine. I just laughed and brushed it off because I felt super uncomfortable and awkward. And he knew I was underage because my name tag was yellow. But even after that, he still kept coming up to me, calling me weird names, just being a total creep. Like, he would keep coming up to me and get super close to me to the point where I could literally feel him fucking breathing on my face. So of course I told my manager about it. They said he's done this before, so I was like, why the fuck is he still here? So they moved me to garden. And while I was working in the gardening section, I met this guy named Jordan. Like for a part 2. Part 2 of how I was sexually harassed twice while working at Walmart. Something I forgot to mention in the first part, I reported Terry several times and they still did nothing about it. So like I said, then I met this kid Jordan, him and I started getting close, and work actually started to become fun. Well, finally, after a month, we decided that we were going to go out to lunch during work. So the day that we went out to lunch, he kept telling me that he needed to tell me something. But he was like beating around the bush the whole time. Like for some reason, he just couldn't get out what he wanted to tell me. But then he kept trying to change the subject like he wasn't the one who brought it up in the first place. I should have took that as a red flag before we went to lunch, but I didn't. So he keeps going on about it in the car, right? And then he's like, I'm not really 20, I'm 25 turning 26. So then for some reason after that, whenever he saw my mood change, this guy has the audacity to start touching my legs and rubbing my inner thigh and shit. I kept telling him to stop. I was like, what the f*** are you doing? So then I told him I'm getting out of the car. And he says, I'm not gonna let you, like for part 3. Part 3 of how I got sexually harassed twice while working at Walmart. So like I said, he wouldn't let me out of the car, but then we got back to work. And then he had the audacity to keep asking if I was okay when he literally just sexually harassed me in the car. So I went to the bathroom, literally had a whole mental breakdown. I called my mom to come get me because I was not gonna stay there. So the next time that I went back to work, I grabbed my stuff and I gave it to one of the workers to go and give to a manager and tell them that I was quitting. Well, one of the managers caught me walking out the back door and she was like, what's wrong? So I immediately broke down. I started telling her what was going on. And then a crowd of people came around us being nosy as fuck, listening to what I was saying. And she was like, you're not quitting. I'm gonna take care of this. So she sent me home and she said that she would call me whenever it was taken care of. So 2 days goes past. I'm like, why the f hasn't she called? So then I call and I found out that she fired me. So I reported everything to Walmart ethic team and they just closed my case. They basically didn't about it. Oh, and Jordan wasn't really a manager. He was a supervisor. Should I try to take this to court? Storytime, I had to go to jail because of my toxic ex-boyfriend. So a little background information. Him and I started dating right after high school. And this relationship was so toxic. We would literally fight over the dumbest shit. So fast forward 4 years later, the one night he had his friends over and he wanted me to cook steak. I decided to cook chicken instead. And this is what triggered the entire fight. He was saying things like, you never listen to what I say, you can't turn a hoe into a housewife type. So he pretty much blew up and was like trying to kick me out of our house. He went to our master bedroom, started breaking all my shit, throwing it down the stairs, and his friends left me there with his crazy ass. So I tried to get him to stop, but he wouldn't, of course. So then he ended up calling his sister, who is 10 years older than me, trying to get her to come to my house and kick my ass. I never really got in a fight like this, so I decided to call 911. She heard him in the background going crazy like for part 2. Part 2 of why I had to go to jail because of my toxic ex-boyfriend. So like I said, the dispatcher on the phone could hear him in the background going absolutely psycho. So she told me to hide. I ran upstairs into the master bedroom and locked the door until they came. So they interviewed us separately, and he has the nerve to start crying, saying that I was beating his ass, and he even scratched himself. So even though I called 911, they said in a domestic dispute they had to take somebody to jail. And since he had visible marks on him, they took me to jail. So the police officer told me to take off all my clothes and to only wear one layer and to also take out my shoelaces before he brought me in. So they booked me in jail, put me in a freezing cold cell with 25 other actual bad for 7 hours. And this is the best part. My ex kept trying to call and get me out the whole time I was in there, saying that he lied and everything. They set a court date for me, but when I showed up, they literally just dropped all the charges. Now I just tell everybody that I've been to jail and I'm not scared to go back. Story time about the scariest night of my life. A lot of background information. So the one weekend, my sister and I decided that we were going to go to my stepdad's, and her best friend was going to come also. I was around 13 at the time. Well, my stepdad and my mom had been broken up for about a few months, but my dad was okay with us going to our stepdad's because he had been with our mom for around 7 years and he's always been good to us. And my stepdad's was 2 hours away. So fast forward, we get to his house, and my sister and her friend wanted to go to a party. Now, me being older now, I knew that they didn't want to bring me because they were around 16 and I was only 13, but I still tried to tag along. Well, they weren't really talking to me or anything, and I hadn't seen my mom in almost a year. So I told my stepdad that I wanted to go and see her, which was a super big deal because she absolutely hated my stepdad. And she didn't want him around us. And by the way, she lived like 5 minutes from him. So if she found out that we went all the way up there to see him and not her, she would have flipped. So he drives me to my mom's house, like for part 2, night of my life. So before I got to my mom's house, I called her. And I pretty much just told her that I was with my stepdad and I wanted to come see her. Like I said, she lived 5 minutes away. So as soon as we pull up, she walks outside. And she starts screaming at my stepdad. She's like, "Those are my kids. You're not allowed to see them, blah, blah, blah." Even though my dad had full custody and he could decide who we could and couldn't see. So after that, we walk in the house. She isn't saying anything. And this house is pretty much like a trap house. There was a knife holding the door shut. Not a kitchen knife, like an actual knife that you stab people with. She's like, "You can sit down, make yourself comfortable." And I didn't want to sit down because I saw needles everywhere and I just saw a rat crawl under the couch. So I was like, "No, I'm fine." And then she was like, "Sorry, not everybody can be rich like you." Which, just to make clear, I'm not rich. I just knew that she was doing drugs with her boyfriend in that house. After that, she pulls the knife that was holding the door shut out and points it right at me, like for part 3. Part 3 about the worst night of my life. So before she points the knife at me, she had been in the kitchen, right? So I went to go and sneak out the door. That's whenever she ran over, ripped the knife out of the door, and pointed it right at me. And she's like screaming a bunch at me. And she's like, "Oh, what, are you gonna tell your dad that I pointed a knife at you?" And I told her, "Yeah, like, what the do you mean? Am I not gonna tell him?" So at this point, she tries to take my phone. And I told her, "No, you're not taking my phone." And at this time, my sister's also texting me and yelling at me because she had told me that I should not go to my mom's house. Probably for that exact reason. A few minutes later, she hears her boyfriend pull up. I had never met her boyfriend. Like I said, I haven't seen her in probably almost a year. As soon as she hears him pull up, she looks at me and she says, "Go out the back door." She literally hurries up, takes me to the back door, and I have to run out the back door. I don't even know where I am. My sister and stepdad were waiting at the gas station across the street, so I ran over there really quickly. And then a few things happened after that. Let me know if you guys want a part 4. Part 4 about the worst night of my life. Just a little side note, I am in bed, so it's going to be a black screen, and you can probably hear my dog snoring. I'm just going to go from my point of view the rest of the time because I texted my sister, but I think she's sleeping. So pretty much I had to call my sister after my mom told her to go out the back door. And there was a Sheetz right across from where she was. But since she had to go out the back, she just saw like all woods and no gas station. So I got on the phone with her. She runs over to the gas station. And when we get back to my stepdad's house, we call our dad and let him know what happened. And the police actually got involved. And they had called my dad. because my mom had called them and told him a bunch of stuff that just wasn't true. Like saying that my stepdad was a pedophile and stuff, just like saying stuff that could actually ruin this man's life. And usually my stepdad would come pick us up and then drop us back off. But the police said that my dad had to come get us tomorrow morning, even though he had full custody and could decide who we could go with and stuff. So my dad came the next day and picked us up. Story time about how my dad was on the news and now everybody knows my last name. So a little background information. This all happened whenever I was in 6th grade. This all happened on a Tuesday night. So I had school the next day. Well, my dad had went to work earlier in the day. Well, around 10 o'clock at night, we hadn't heard from my dad all day, which was super weird for him because he was always home around 10 o'clock. And even if he wasn't, he still would have kept in contact with us and let us know where he was at. So at this point, my family and I were really scared and we're thinking that something happened to him. I was calling and texting him, my mom was calling and texting him. My whole family was pretty much trying to get a hold of him. Like, we had called all the hospitals to see if he was there. We called police stations to see if he might have been in jail or if they had his last name in the system. So nobody had heard or seen from him. So we all went to sleep that night hoping that he would show up in the morning. So the next day after I got home from school, my mom came home from work and she had told me about this phone call that she got. Like for part 2. Part 2 of how my dad was on the news and now everybody knows my last name. So like I said, my mom had gotten home from work and she told me about this phone call that she got while she was at work. So apparently one of her coworkers called her and said, "Hey, I think I saw your husband on the news." So after that, she showed me the news article and I couldn't even believe what I was reading. So I guess my dad had been drinking and he went to an auto repair shop and stole a car because I guess the keys were left in the door of the car. And what makes this even worse, the car that he stole had 2 guns in the trunk. And they weren't 2 pistols, these were 2 big ass guns that were loaded. Oh wait, I forgot something. So before this, he had been at the strip club and somehow he ended up in pink lingerie. Guys, I cannot make it up. So he was driving around and he decided to park right in the middle of an intersection and it was literally causing a whole scene. There were people with their kids worried as hell. So after that, a few people called the cops, like for part 3. Part 2 about how my dad was on the news and now everybody knows my last name. So like I said, my dad parked in the middle of an intersection and people were calling the cops. So when the police arrived, my dad was half passed out in the car. This happened in like the middle of broad day, like there's traffic everywhere. So when they finally get up to the car, my dad is literally slumped in the driver's seat. There was a bottle of whiskey in the door and it was completely empty. When they went to arrest him, he started resisting. He was screaming a bunch of profanities at them and started kicking them, threatening them with guns, which made the situation worse because my dad had no clue that there were any guns in the back of the car. So that just made the police think that they were his. So they take my dad to jail and he has like 7 charges against him. But we were happy because we knew where he was. Well, the worst part is, so the next day when I went to school, people were coming up to me asking if that was my dad on the news. Some people were even making fun of me because of what he did. And that's really embarrassing for a 12-year-old. But it's okay, Dad, I still love you. Storytime about how I was groomed for almost 2 years and didn't even know it. So a little background information. When I was 15, my house burnt down, and I went into a little bit of a depression. So after losing everything, my 6 siblings and I had to move into a 3-bedroom place with my grandparents. And a month or so later, I was looking for friends. Someone to talk to or pretty much anything that would just make me feel better. Well, this guy messaged me, and he said, "You're pretty as and I'm 15, so I was excited. Well, 2 weeks later, I asked my mom if I could go over my friend Samantha's. And of course she said yes, because I had stayed with Samantha a lot during this time. Also because there was barely room for any of us in this 3-bedroom house. So a little background information on my parents. My mom had been a police officer for 12 years. Sadly, she had to retire because of a neck surgery. My ex-stepdad was and still is a police officer today. Anyway, so my mom asked for pictures whenever I went over Samantha's to make sure I was really there. Like for part 2. Storytime about how I was groomed for almost 2 years and didn't even know. So like I said, my mom used to ask for pictures to make sure that I was really at Samantha's house. Well, Samantha lived about 10 minutes away from the guy that I was talking to. Every time that I went to her house, I would leave at about 8 p.m. and go over to his house. And he was 26 years old. And obviously I knew my parents would freak the fuck out if they found out. And we had planned to keep this a secret until I turned 18. So that way my parents couldn't tell me that I wasn't allowed to be with him. To flash forward to about 3 days before I turned 18, my mom comes into my work. She walks up to me, shows me a picture of him, and says, "Who the hell is this?" So of course I say I have no idea who the hell she's talking about. She said okay and then left. Well, as soon as I got home, her and my dad were sitting in the living room, waiting for me to explain who that man was. So I told them everything. They decided not to take legal action, but my mom explained to me that I was so young and he took advantage of me and stuff like that, so I never saw him again. Storytime about why my mom kicked me out when I was 16. So a little background information. This had all started as soon as my dad left my mom and I. I was like 13 around the time. Well, ever since then, my mom would have different guys in and out of the house all the time. Like, we were lucky if a month went by and she was still with the same dude. Which, I mean, I kind of get it because my dad did leave us for a woman that he had started another family with. But at the same time, it was just a whole mess. Anyway, so she had got with this new guy, and we're gonna call him Tyler. And by the way, the dudes that she would date, they would literally live at our house. Anyway, so a week after he moved in, I started getting really close to him, which usually never happens. Usually I would try to keep my distance because I knew how wrong it was of her having all these different guys in the house when I'm only 16. Anyways, every time that my mom would go to work, he would invite me to go see a movie, and he would just be really flirty with me. And he was only 6 years older than me, and my mom was 32. You do the math. Anyways, like for part 2. Part 2 about why my mom kicked me out when I was 16. So like I said, the guy was being super flirty with me, inviting me to the movies when my mom wasn't home and all that stuff. Well, then it led to more than just that. By the way, this guy did not have a job, so he was home with me 24/7. And I was doing online school. So we were in the house by ourselves, 12 hours a day, 5 days a week. Anyways, like I said, it led to more, and we started doing the nasty and stuff. Ew, just, yeah. Well, the one day after we got done doing the nasty in my mom's room, we had fell asleep. And yes, we did not have clothes on. Well, at 2 in the morning, I hear someone pounding on the bedroom door, and my mom worked night shifts. So we get up, he hurries up and gets dressed and tells me to hide under the bed. And he opens the door, and it's my mom's sister. My sister literally lived in the apartment next door. And she was like, "Oh yeah, neither of you were answering the phone, so she wanted me to check on you guys. Like, where's Elena?" And I'm still under the bed naked, like for part 3. Part 3 about why my mom kicked me out when I was 16. So like I said, I'm laying under the bed, no clothes on. She asks where I am. And he's like, "Oh, she should be in her room." So he goes looking for me everywhere with her. And he's like, "Oh, well, maybe she's outside on the patio." And I don't know why the hell my mom's sister had a key to our apartment anyways. But she's still looking for me in the apartment, and she looks under the bed. And at first she's like, "Oh my god, what did he do to you?" And I'm trying to tell her nothing, like I made that decision on my own. So she calls my mom right away. My mom comes home, she's screaming at me, and she kicks me out. So I go to my grandma's house, and I told my grandma what happened. And my grandma calls her, and she's like, "It's not her fault that you gave her daddy issues." And I'm like, bruh, what the child. Anyways, so then she goes on Facebook and starts posting about how I'm a whore and a slut and how, like, it isn't her boyfriend's fault at all. So now I live story time about one of the most embarrassing things that has ever happened to me in high school. So a little background information. I was in my freshman year of high school. Well, spring break was coming up. Well, the whole year, my friend and I hadn't been to one single party. So we decided that we wanted to try and go to a party every single day of spring break, which was about to be super difficult because we had to worry about my strict-ass parents and my neighbors. A little background info on my neighbor. My neighbor is this girl who's in my same grade, and she literally hates my guts. I don't know why, but literally anything that I do, she'll go and she'll tell her mom, and then her mom will tell my mom, because my mom and her mom are best friends. But before we know it, Saturday comes around, and we go back to school on Monday. We did not make it to one single party. Well, later that night, we found out that one of our friends was throwing one. So around 11 o'clock, everybody's sleeping, and I walk out my back door, hop over my fence, and I start heading towards the road where my friend was going to be parked. You know, who do I see sitting outside on their porch reading a book? My neighbor. Like for part 2. Part 2 about the most embarrassing thing that ever happened to me in high school. So like I said, the bitch that I hate is sitting out on her porch reading a book at 11 o'clock at night. So I crouch down so she couldn't see me. I run to the car, and my friend and I finally go to the party. Well, we get to that party and it's really boring, so we decided to go to a different one. And the party that we were about to go through was being thrown by the kid that I really liked. So I start hanging out with him when we get there. I'm drinking a lot, having so much fun, and I really have to go to the bathroom. And I didn't know where anything was at all, so I grabbed my friend and we're looking around everywhere for the bathroom. Because when I asked him, he was super drunk and really couldn't explain to me where the bathroom was. So we were pretty much left to fend for ourselves. But we ended up not being able to find a bathroom, and this is where I had to improvise. So my friend and I go to the laundry room, and we see the litter box in there for the cat. Well, at this point, I was desperate, so I just went in the litter box. Well, 30 minutes later, the cops show up to the party. And everybody had to hurry up and leave because we did not want to get underages. Like for part 3. Story time. My boyfriend found out that his best friend got me pregnant. It was my junior year in high school, and my boyfriend and I had been dating for 4 months. Well, the one night him, his friend, and I were all supposed to go to this party. My boyfriend ended up getting called into work that night, so his friend and I went. Which my boyfriend was fine with because he wanted his best friend to keep an eye on me, but he also trusted us. Anyway, so his friend and I ended up going to the party, and then but the next morning I woke up, I didn't remember that at all. So fast forward, I find out that I'm pregnant. Well, me forgetting that I totally cheated on my boyfriend, I thought that it was his. Well, a week later, I get a text from his friend. He's like, oh my god, what are we gonna do? And I'm like, what do you mean, what are we gonna do? So then he filled me in on the whole situation that I didn't remember. But I was like, there's really no chance of this because my boyfriend and I like a million times, and me and you once. The real tea is that my boyfriend was black and his friend was white. Well, me being the that I am, I was like, well, let's just wait it out. I bet it's not his. Like for part 2. Part 2 about how my boyfriend found out that his best friend got me pregnant. So like I said, my boyfriend was black, his best friend was white, and because I doubted that it was his best friend's kid, I decided to wait it out. Say it with me, bad idea. So fast forward, I'm in the delivery room and I decide not to have my boyfriend in there. Well, let's just say good thing that he did. Whenever this thing popped out, it was white as paper. So I was like to the doctor, oh my gosh, like I'm gonna have a panic attack. Please get the baby out of the room. I don't want anybody around the baby right now. So when my boyfriend came back in the room, I was like, oh, we can't see the baby. He's having some issues. He's over here freaking out. I'm having a panic attack about what I'm gonna do. And they brought my kid back and I was like, that's not my kid. And this girl looked so confused. She was like, oh, okay. And my boyfriend and I are laughing. We're like, oh, haha, that's funny. Then she comes back into the room and she's like, ma'am, this is your kid. So my boyfriend started screaming, and he broke up with me after that. Like, how rude to just leave me with a kid by myself. No, I'm just joking. I know that was pretty fucked.